May 1989. The air in the deep timber of the Adirondacks, Essex County, New York, is thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. But as two local berry pickers push through a dense patch of undergrowth near a forgotten logging trail, the smell changes into something sweet, cloying, and unmistakable. They find it in the shadows of the hemlocks. Two bodies, or what is left of them. A discovery that opens a tomb waiting 36 years to be fully understood. But the real horror is not what was in those woods, it is what was buried under a suburban garage floor 40 miles away. Hand me that file over there, the heavy one with the yellowing Polaroid stapled to the top right corner. The date stamp is smudged, but the ink from the old Smith Corona typewriter is still sharp, reading case file 89-402. We are looking at the crime scene photos of what the press called the Woodland murders, but we are seeing them through the lens of a cold, grey American industrial town in the late 80s. This is not just a story about a disappearance. It is a deeply disturbing look at a monster who spent decades curating a gallery of death right behind a white picket fence, living right next door. Look at this first report, dated July 1989. The Adirondack Wilderness was supposed to be a sanctuary, but for Peter and Ursula Reinold, a couple from the city just looking for a weekend hike, it became a kill box. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind 7 weeks of dead silence before those berry pickers finally stumbled upon their remains. And here is the detail in this typed coroner's report that absolutely chills the bone. While the New York State Police were cordoning off that first site, while the flashbulbs were popping and the yellow tape was being strung between the birch trees, the killer was still there. Just 800 yards away, through the thicket, he was watching the police work. And he was not alone. He had a second pair of victims with him, Ingrid Warmbier and burnt Michael Copping, right there in the brush. The forensics from '89 are an absolute mess, printed on paper so thin you can see the grain of the wood desk right through it. The reports mention struggle marks, they mention personal items scattered in the dirt, and they mention trophies taken from the victims. The police were completely blind, operating in an era before genetic genealogy, looking for a transient drifter, a phantom in the woods. They did not realize the monster had a permanent mailing address, a steady job, a brother, and a secret room in a house that looked like every other house on a quiet suburban block. 4 dead bodies in 2 weeks, the crime scenes practically overlapping, and the sheer panic that gripped that region was unlike anything the state had ever seen. If you look at this newspaper clipping from the local Gazette, you can see the fear. People were terrified to let their kids play outside, no one went into the woods anymore, and the entire rural community was paralyzed by the thought that anyone could be the next target. The pressure on the detectives was suffocating, dealing with an invisible predator who seemed to be hunting for sport. Let me slide this other folder over to you, because to understand the man in the woods in 1989, we have to look at a dusty classroom in a small town outside Albany, New York, back in 1954. I am looking at the school psychologist's notes right now, and even back then, they knew something was deeply broken. They described a 13-year-old boy named Kurt-Werner Wickham as a strange bird, an absolute loner living in extreme fear of his parents in a household described as primitive. The notes say the boy was lost, but as we flip through these crumbling arrest records from the 1960s, we see exactly where he found himself. By the time he was 18, Wickham was not just a troubled kid, he was a lethal threat. It is October 1966, a cold, rainy night in a suburban neighborhood, and Wickham is spotted by a patrol car. He does not run, he does not put his hands up. He pulls a small caliber rifle and opens fire directly on the police officers. Think about the gravity of that for a second. In the mid-60s, you did not just shoot at the police unless you were completely devoid of empathy and ready to go all the way to the morgue. He was arrested, of course, but the lenient system of the time, the revolving door of mid-century psychiatric care, eventually spat him back out onto the streets. And then we get to the incident with the hitchhiker in 1971, which reads like a terrifying blueprint for his entire life's work. According to this faded trial transcript, a young woman is picked up on a lonesome stretch of highway. Wickham strangles her until she is completely unconscious. He assumes she is dead, so he tosses her limp body into the trunk of his Chevy, right next to a shovel that is already waiting there. He did not just want to assault her, he wanted to dispose of her, to erase her from the earth. But she woke up in the dark, and when he opened that trunk to finish the job, she fought like her life depended on it, hitting him with the very shovel he intended to bury her with, and she managed to escape. He was sentenced to 5.5 years for that attack, and when he walked out of prison in the mid-70s, he did not rehabilitate, he just got significantly better at hiding his nature. He became a landscape gardener. Think about the dark irony dripping from that career choice. A man who spent his nights burying terrible secrets in the dirt, spent his days tending to the beauty of other people's lawns. He worked for wealthy families, he moved quietly in their social circles, playing the role of the invisible man with a green thumb and blood on his hands. Now let's look at the disappearance that finally broke the dam open, detailed in this manila envelope marked August 1989. Her name was Beverly Mayer. She was a 41-year-old photographer, a mother, and described by everyone who knew her as a ray of sunshine in a rather drab town. She vanishes from her beautiful home without a single trace. The local police, completely preoccupied with the Woodland Killer headlines dominating the news cycle, treated her case as a domestic footnote. They thought she had run off, or they thought her husband, who was going through a divorce with her, had done it. They wasted years looking in the absolute wrong direction, while Beverly was only a few feet away from where she was last seen alive. Listen to the background hiss on this audio cassette from a 1990 missing persons television broadcast. You can hear the raw, unfiltered desperation in her daughter's voice, a young woman who was functioning like a machine just to survive the trauma of not knowing. But the lead detective at the time, a man named Manfred Hamel, had a gut feeling that refused to go away. He looked at the neighbor's gardener, he pulled Wickham's old files, and he saw the violent history, the sexual deviancy, the sheer cold-bloodedness of his past. Hamel applied for a search warrant, practically begging the district attorney to let him into that house. But the DA looked at the circumstantial evidence and said no, denying the warrant and creating a 3-year delay that allowed a serial predator to keep breathing free air while his victims rotted. It was not until 1993 that the law finally caught up with him, and even then, it was a sheer stroke of luck. It was a routine traffic stop following an accident near a quiet Pennsylvania town. A simple investigation turned into a waking nightmare when the state troopers searched Wickham's car and found a mobile torture kit in the trunk. They found handcuffs, knives, and hunting instruments that had absolutely no business being in a suburban gardener's vehicle. He was immediately thrown into a concrete cell in the county jail for weapons violations. While he sat in that damp cell, Wickham knew the clock had finally run out. He started frantically writing letters, and we have the photocopies right here in the archive. He is writing to his brother and his wife, giving them highly specific chores around the house. He tells his brother to clean the gutters over the cellar entrance, but warns him to be very careful. He tells his wife to smash the statue of the Madonna by the fireplace and throw it away. He was not worried about home maintenance. He was giving coded instructions from behind bars on how to destroy the physical evidence of a lifetime of murder. But before the homicide detectives could sit him down in an interrogation room with a tape recorder, Wickham took the coward's way out. He used his own belt in the middle of the night to hang himself in his cell. He died, taking a cemetery full of secrets to the grave. And because he was legally dead, the justice system did something absolutely unforgivable. They closed the investigative files. They took the weapons, the ammunition, and the car they had dug out of his yard, and they destroyed the evidence. They took the phrase, "dead men tell no tales," and turned it into bureaucratic policy, burning the very clues that could have brought dozens of grieving families some peace. They did not count on Beverly Mayer's brother, though. William Seelaf was not just a grieving sibling. He was a retired captain of the state police. He knew exactly how the system worked, and he knew exactly how to break it open. For 28 agonizing years, William ran a private investigation that makes most true crime documentaries look like amateur hour. He gathered a team of retired cops, forensic specialists, and lawyers, and they never once stopped looking for Beverly. Fast forward to the year 2017. The old Wickham property has changed hands. The meticulously kept garden is now overgrown and wild, but William and his cold case team finally get permission to dig on the property. They focus all their attention on the garage. There is a concrete mechanics pit in the floor, ostensibly for working on cars from underneath, but William realizes it is completely wrong. It is too shallow, and it has been deliberately filled in. They bring in heavy drilling equipment, shattering the quiet suburban afternoon as they tear through the concrete. And there, under the oil-stained floor of a neighborhood garage, they find her, Beverly Mayer. Found after nearly 3 decades, shot in the head and buried in a tomb her killer had constructed with his own hands. The discovery of Beverly was the golden key that forced the state to reckon with its past. It allowed the police to finally reopen those cold Adirondack cases from the summer of '89. And thanks to the miracle of modern forensic science, specifically mitochondrial DNA that can pull a genetic profile from a single rootless hair found in the victim's cars, they finally connected the dots. They matched Wickham's DNA to the vehicles of the Woodland victims from 30 years prior. The quiet gardener was the Woodland Killer. The neighbor across the fence was the monster the whole state had been terrified of. But here is where this dusty archive file gets even darker, peeling back a layer of psychological horror we rarely see. When the police finally did a full, unfettered forensic sweep of Wickham's house in 2018, stripping it down to the studs, they found the secret room. It was on the second floor, hidden behind a heavy, soundproof door that only Wickham and his brother were ever allowed to pass through. Inside, it was not a workshop. It was a shrine to his own depravity. They found hidden compartments built directly into the walls, stuffed with weapons and neatly clipped newspaper articles about unsolved murders from all over the country, not just the ones the police already knew about. And then they brought the cadaver dogs and the heavy excavators out into the yard. They dug through the soil he had tended so carefully. They did not find more bodies, but they found something that suggests a staggering scale of violence. They unearthed 500 items buried in the dirt. Women's shoes, handbags, wallets, pieces of jewelry, all buried in the earth like rotting seeds. Wickham was a prolific trophy hunter. He did not just kill people. He curated a subterranean graveyard of their belongings. If even a fraction of those 500 items represents a life touched by his violence, we are looking at one of the most prolific, undetected predators in American history. The cold truth, documented in these modern forensic updates, is that Wickham had access to at least 25 different vehicles over his lifetime. He was highly mobile, he was practically invisible, and he could be hunting in Ohio one week and Maryland the next. That secret soundproof room contained newspaper clippings about a woman shot near a park in 1968, and articles about a horrific assault and murder from 1969. Witnesses from a 1986 disappearance swear they saw his face near the scene of the crime. The sheer volume of evidence suggests he started killing long before 1989 and never really stopped. But the most haunting question, the one that keeps the cold case detectives awake at night in 2024, is the accomplice theory. Look at the logistical nightmare of the 1989 murders. The victims' cars were moved miles away from the crime scenes after they were killed. One of the cars ended up parked at a train station 50 miles away. How does a man murder 2 people in the deep woods and then drive their car 50 miles away while his own vehicle stays near the scene? He could not have walked back 50 miles in the dark. He had a driver. He had help. The police currently have a suspect in their crosshairs, a living, breathing person who still walks the streets. Someone who was deep in Wickham's inner circle, someone who presumably walked through that heavy, soundproof door and saw the trophies. Someone who knew exactly what the gardener was planting in the yard. This person is not talking. They are leaning heavily on their right to remain silent, waiting for the clock to run out on the investigation. But down in the basement labs, the forensics teams are still working on those hairs pulled from the cars back in '89. They are running the samples, looking for a second DNA profile, hunting for the partner who helped orchestrate the slaughter. We are standing on the very edge of the final revelation. 36 years later, the gardener of death is rotting in the ground, but his toxic legacy is still being unearthed, piece by piece. Every time a new shoe is identified from that pile of 500, a cold case file somewhere in America gets a name. The terrifying lesson from case file 89-402 is not that evil is something far away, something that only exists in movie theaters. It is that evil is incredibly patient. It is meticulous. It mows your lawn, It waves to your kids, and it says a polite hello over the garden fence. And sometimes it is waiting for you just 800 yards away in the dark woods, watching you discover what it did to the last people who walked down the trail. The archive boxes stay open. The investigation continues. Because as long as that second DNA profile remains unidentified, and as long as that accomplice is buying groceries and walking the streets, the bloody summer of '89 is not truly over. It is just waiting for the next horrifying discovery in the underbrush.